before everything changed. Our life was simple and full, in the best way. We were one of those couples people quietly envied, not because we were rich or extraordinary, but because we were steady. We had our routines, lazy Sunday mornings with the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, spontaneous trips to the countryside, plans for a small house with a garden, where our future children would run barefoot in the summer. We both worked jobs that weren't glamorous but paid the bills. He in a small engineering firm, me in marketing. We talked about maybe starting our own business one day, something that would allow us to travel more and spend less time chained to office desks. Our evenings were spent on the couch, discussing travel destinations, joking about baby names or planning what the next year might bring. There was an ease between us, an unspoken understanding that we were in this together. No matter what came, I look back on those days now, with a kind of aching nostalgia, realizing how much of that security wasn't about circumstances at all. It was about the illusion that time was endless and health was something we could count on without question. It started with little things, so little that at first, I brushed them off. He complained about feeling tired more often, which I blamed on long hours at work. Then came the occasional dizziness, a slight loss of appetite, a few nights of restless sleep. We laughed about how we were getting old, even though we were barely in our 30s. There was one moment I remember clearly. We were at the park, walking our usual route, and he had to sit down halfway, because he felt lightheaded. He smiled it off, saying it was probably just the heat, but something in his face, how pale he looked, stayed with me. Still, neither of us made an appointment. Life was busy. There were always reasons to wait until next week. Looking back, I wonder how much would have changed if we had taken those signs seriously. But at that time, it was easier to believe everything was fine, that our future was still stretching endlessly ahead. The day we finally went to the doctor felt oddly ordinary at first. A routine visit, just to be safe. I sat in the waiting room, scrolling through my phone, fully expecting to be told it was stress, or maybe a vitamin deficiency. But the tests led to more tests, and the waiting stretched into weeks. I remember the sterile smell of the clinic, the rustle of papers, the way his fingers twitched in his lap as we sat in the doctor's office for the final results. When the words came, chronic, progressive, serious, I felt my ears ringing, like the world had turned down its volume. The doctor's voice became a blur of medical terms, treatment plans, timelines. My husband stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. But he didn't squeeze back either. That night, we sat in silence for hours. Neither of us cried. It was as if our lives had split into a before and an after, and we were standing at the edge of that divide, not knowing how to step forward. The first months after the diagnosis were a blur of appointments, medications, and cautious optimism. We became regulars in hospital corridors, our calendar filled with consultations and therapy schedules instead of weekend plans. I threw myself into research, reading late into the night about treatment options, dietary changes, clinical trials, anything that might give us an edge. He tried to keep his routine, even made jokes about being a medical project, but I saw the fear beneath his smile. There were moments of hope, small improvements after a new medication, a day where his energy seemed to return, but they were always followed by setbacks. The treatments made him nauseous, restless, irritable. Friends visited less often. Family stopped asking when we'd try for children. Our home became a halfway place between a hospital and a waiting room. And yet we kept going, because that's what you do at first. You fight. You believe that effort and love can tip the scales, that this is just a temporary storm. As the months turned into a year, the illness began to change more than just his body. It changed him. At first, it was subtle. He grew quieter, less patient, quicker to snap at small things. He started withdrawing from friends, then from me. The man who once filled our home with warmth and playful sarcasm now often sat in silence, staring at the floor, lost in some unreachable place. I tried to remind him of who we were, suggested our old movie nights, proposed small weekend trips, even tried to bring intimacy back into our lives, but he would brush it off, or say he was too tired. The treatments wore him down, but so did the endless waiting for good news that rarely came. And I changed too. I became cautious with my words, careful with my questions, always trying not to burden him further. The space between us wasn't sudden. It was like a slow leak in a boat. One day you look down, and the water is already at your feet. There came a point when the exhaustion stopped being just physical. It was something deeper, quieter, more corrosive. I woke up every morning already tired, not just from sleepless nights filled with his restless turning, but from carrying the weight of our new life. I began to feel like a caretaker, a nurse, a scheduler, anything but a wife. I hated myself for thinking that. Guilt became my constant companion. Guilt for feeling trapped, for missing the life we had, for wishing I could just disappear for a weekend and not answer my phone. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd cry quietly in the bathroom, so he wouldn't hear. I would look at my reflection, eyes swollen, and ask myself if I was a terrible person for wanting something else, not someone else, necessarily, just a version of me, who wasn't drowning in responsibilities she never chose. And yet, every morning, I'd make his tea, remind him of his pills, and tell him we'd get through this, because that's what you do. When love turns into duty, you keep going, even when your heart is fraying at the edges. The breaking point wasn't a dramatic moment. It was an evening like any other, with the TV moaning in the background and the two of us sitting at opposite ends of the couch, a canyon of silence between us. I realized I hadn't felt like his partner in months. I was his shadow, his assistant, his witness. One night, I suggested couples therapy. He shrugged it off, said we had bigger problems to worry about. Another time, I gently asked if he wanted me to take a weekend away to visit my sister, just to breathe. He looked at me with something like betrayal, and said, "So you want a break from me now?" That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and thought, I can't keep living in this limbo. I had to choose between trying to fight for our marriage, not the old one, because that was gone, but something new, or accepting that it had already broken under the weight of his illness and our silence. I chose to stay, not because it was easy, but because I wasn't ready to let go of the man he used to be, or the part of me that still hoped he might return. Staying didn't magically fix anything. There were no sweeping gestures, no sudden return of the man I married, but making the conscious choice to remain shifted something in me. I stopped waiting for the old life to come back and started looking for meaning in the fragments we still had. Some days, that meant sitting with him in silence without resenting it. Other days, it meant going for a walk alone, giving myself permission to breathe without guilt. I learned that love isn't always warm and bright. Sometimes it's quiet and heavy, like a stone you carry because you once promised to. We still have bad days. Many, in fact. But there are also moments of softness. His hand reaching for mine without a word, a rare smile when the pain eases for a while. The memory of who we were woven into who we are now. I don't know what our future holds. I've stopped planning years ahead. Instead, I've come to see resilience not as strength without cracks, but as the choice to stay, even when the map has been torn apart. Over time, I realized our life had quietly redefined itself. There were no clear turning points, just a gradual settling into something unfamiliar, something that no longer resembled the plans we once made. The trips we dreamed about became postponed indefinitely. Our savings meant for a down payment on a house were eaten away by medical bills. And yet, life kept moving in its stubborn way. I learned which doctors answered calls after hours, how to measure his mood by the way he stirred his tea, when to push him to go outside and when to leave him be. I stopped waiting for things to go back and started finding small victories. A day without pain, a laugh over something trivial, a moment when his eyes softened again. This wasn't the marriage I had imagined, but it was still ours, in its imperfect, fragile form. Even as we settled into this new version of life, cracks lingered beneath the surface. There were conversations we didn't have, about intimacy, about the distance that had grown between us, about the resentment that quietly coiled in corners of my heart. I found myself avoiding friends' questions about how we were doing. I smiled and said, "We're managing," because the real answer felt too complicated, too heavy for casual conversation. Nights were the hardest. That was when the silence felt sharpest, when I would remember how it used to feel to be held without a trace of effort in it. He, too, had his walls. The illness had made him guarded, almost suspicious of anything that hinted at pity. He hated feeling dependent, and I think he hated even more the way it changed the way I looked at him, though I tried so hard not to let it show. We were together, yes, but we were not untouched. Amidst the exhaustion and the quiet distance, there were tiny moments that reminded me why I had chosen to stay. A hand lightly brushing mine as we passed in the kitchen, a shared cup of tea at dawn, a laugh over a memory only we understood. The small acts became anchors. They didn't erase the pain or the fatigue, but they reminded me that connection doesn't always have to be grand. It can live in the ordinary, in gestures that almost go unnoticed. I started looking for these moments deliberately. Sometimes I would leave little notes for him on the counter, just to see him smile. Sometimes he would do the same for me, and I realized that even when words failed us, care could still be expressed quietly, persistently, like a thread holding fragile glass together. It wasn't the life we had imagined, but these tiny connections gave me a reason to keep trying, a reason to continue in the face of relentless struggle. Even with those small moments of connection, resentment would creep in. Unexpected, uninvited. He resented the illness for changing him, for turning our plans into fragments. I resented myself for sometimes wishing I could run away, for the selfish thoughts I couldn't seem to control. He had his own resentment, though he rarely voiced it. I could see it in the way he flinched at my touch, when he was tired, in the sharpness of his words, when he felt cornered. Sometimes it felt like we were two strangers, living under the same roof, each carrying a heavy burden we didn't know how to share. I hated these moments, hated the anger and guilt, tangled together, but they were real. I realized that love didn't mean the absence of resentment. It meant enduring it, acknowledging it, and still choosing to stay, even when it felt impossibly hard. Slowly, I began to understand that clinging to the life we had imagined was only making the present heavier. The dream house, the carefree trips, the late-night talks that went on till dawn, they were gone, at least in the form I had pictured. Letting go of those expectations didn't happen overnight. It was a series of quiet realizations, that a day where he could walk without pain was a victory, that a shared meal without argument was a gift, that holding his hand while he slept could be enough to feel love again. By lowering the pedestal of what I thought our marriage should be, I opened a small space for acceptance. It wasn't resignation. It was the recognition that life and love could take forms I hadn't anticipated. In letting go of expectations, I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. Caring for him, navigating the unending cycle of hope and disappointment, forced me to confront my own limits, and then push past them. I started carving out moments for myself, small ones at first. I woke in the morning, journaling my thoughts, calling a friend just to hear a normal voice. These acts of self-preservation didn't diminish my love or duty. They sustained it. I realized that strength wasn't about never breaking, It was about breaking, acknowledging the fracture, and still choosing to show up. Each day I remained present, patient and compassionate. I reminded myself that love could coexist with fatigue, and that caring for someone didn't have to erase care for oneself. Looking back, I see our journey not as a tragedy but as a testament to the complexities of love and human resilience. Illness reshaped us, challenged us, and stripped away the illusions of effortless happiness. Yet, even in the cracks and silences, there were moments of truth, moments that revealed the depth of commitment and the quiet courage it takes to stay. I learned that love is not always radiant. Sometimes it is heavy, demanding and imperfect. Duty and devotion are not weaknesses, but choices that define who we are when everything else falls away. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that resilience does not mean carrying the world alone. It means finding strength within, reaching out when needed, and accepting that life and relationships will never be the same. We are still together, not the couple we once were, but a couple who has survived storms most people cannot imagine, and in that survival, I find a fragile, profound hope, a reminder that even when life bends us, we can still stand, hand in hand.